Hi everyone, welcome back. I asked you guys which room you'd like to see next, and you all voted for the foresty Hobbit bedroom. So, your wish is my command. As a lot of you probably remember, I thrifted this Bratz ski lodge bed a while ago and gave it a bit of a makeover. If you'd like to see that process, it's in this video. But anyway, this is kind of what inspired today's room, so we're going to try and keep it super woodsy and try to shoehorn in as much nature magic as we can, plus some cute little hobbity features, of course. Speaking of which, a big focal point in this room is going to be a lovely round Hobbit window, which I'm super excited to make because I've always wanted a Hobbit window. Actually, just like a Hobbit hole in general, but especially the doors and windows. Now, I learned a bit from the window I made in the nursery, so this time I really want to try and give it some better depth. And I plan on doing this by creating, I guess you'd call it like a shadow box type situation. We are working in the bigger bookshelf for today's room, and I'm going to start by attaching this printed out picture of Hobbiton, you know, where they actually filmed in New Zealand, to the back wall. Then my next step will be to create a second false back wall. Stay with me, I promise this will make sense soon. I have cut a big piece of foam board to the same size as the existing back wall. I'm using a bowl to trace a circle right in the very middle of the foam board. Then dividing it into 4 quadrants, adding a centimetre wide border between them before cutting each one out with my craft knife. I also want to add some, what I can only really describe as like a rustic wooden beams, but on the wall instead of the ceiling. For this, I'm going to take some tips from Rachel Maxey. If you haven't seen her channel, I'd highly recommend. She quite often uses foam to make faux wood cosplay and stuff like that. And I have these kind of cuboid-shaped pieces of foam packaging that I'm going to hot glue end to end. I have another one that I'm going to cut at a diagonal so I can glue it to the side of the main beam for a bit more visual kind of interest. Then once they're all glued, I'm going to use my craft knife to kind of just carve into the foam to create some sort of approximation of wood texture. Once I'm happy with the texture, I am coating the whole thing in a layer of dark brown acrylic paint, trying to work it into all the little cracks and crevices we've just made. Once that has dried, I'm using a light brown Posca pen to just lightly kind of dry brush just the raised parts of my wood texturing. While I wait for that to dry, I'm going to cover my foam board with this kind of mottled green wallpaper sample. I don't quite have enough to cover the entire foam board piece, so I'm just having to kind of patch any offcuts together. Then, once we've cut our window back out, I can use my beams, which I made a second one of, to cover the remaining gaps in the paper. which may have been the reason I decided to make them in the first place. Then I'm going to paint the bare foam that I've cut the window out of, as well as this kind of center cross frame part. And then I'm a little worried I'm going to regret this, but I'm also going to basically freehand a frame around the outside of the window. And fingers crossed that any wobbly, uneven edges will just add to that rustic kind of hobbity feel. Okay, I did wind up going in with my watercolour pencils off camera just to kind of add some depth to the paint job. Sorry I didn't manage to get that on camera. I was, to be honest, I was panicking slightly, but I think it turned out pretty well in the end. Speaking of not being able to get things on camera, I need to slide that false back wall into the shelf now, but I can't do that without removing the shelf above, which I think would be a little bit hard to get on video. So instead I'm going to employ some editing magic, and now that that's in, I also have this somewhat tangled string of fairy lights, and I'm going to leave the battery pack out and just run the cable down the side. And then I'm just going to tape them around the back of the window hole. Then I can turn the fairy lights on, and as you can see, we've got some light coming in through the window. I'm just going to turn my ring light off so it's a little bit more visible. And now it's hopefully kind of looking like daylight. Obviously, the next thing to do is the side walls. I've cut some more foam board to the size of the side walls this time, and I didn't have any more of this paper, and I didn't really have enough of any other paper colours to do both walls. However, I did find this curtain that I thrifted a while ago, and as you can see, the green shades kind of match, and the rest is this nice kind of vintage cream colour. So I've cut out a piece of the curtain fabric, and I'm going to wrap it tightly around the foam board that I cut to the size of the side walls. I'm gluing it in the back with hot glue and just pulling it taut. Once I have them both done, I'm going to slide them in as well. Now that all the walls are finished, I do need to consider the floor, and I originally kind of thought I might be able to get away with leaving it as is, because I do want a wood floor for this room, and obviously the shelves do have this kind of fake wood veneer to them. However, now that I'm seeing it next to the beams, the difference in texture seems really obvious to me, and it kind of just emphasizes how fake this veneer is. So now I think I'm gonna wind up making floorboards for the room. I do have more offcuts from that grey vinyl flooring that I painted to go in the Whimsigoth room. So I do know I can paint it to look more realistic, and I think that's gonna be my best bet for this room. So I have all my little vinyl offcut strips, and I'm just going to paint them dark brown, including all the white edges. Then I'm just dry brushing with the Posca pen the same way I did with the foam, and since you've already seen that, I'm just going to skip this. I cut out a piece of paper to the size of the room and then painted it black. So now I can take my mini floorboards, and I'm using double-sided tape to stick them to the paper, trying to fit them together as best I can, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Now we have a much more fitting floor, I think, and with that the shell of the room is all finished and I can move on to adding some furniture. The first thing, of course, is the bed we planned the whole room around, and I'm just going to put this against one of the side walls. Next, I have this, which is the jewellery box I thrifted a while ago because it looks to me like a doll-sized wardrobe. I figured with the gold hardware and the pretty kind of flower vine details on the glass, it would fit in pretty nicely with our Hobbit room. And I'm probably going to put it against this wall. However, first of all, I do want to customize it a little bit. As you can see, on this side, the wood isn't finished in the same way it is on the opposite side, and that's because this originally had 4 drawers in these gaps here. I don't mind that they're missing because I can use them as shelves. However, it does look quite unfinished. So I think what I'm going to do is use some gloss Mod Podge to varnish it and try and make it look like the other side a bit more. I'm going to experiment on the inside of this middle shelf here, and my first test is going to be a little bit of glossy Mod Podge, which is doing pretty much nothing. There is a slight kind of warming of the wood, and obviously it will be more glossy afterwards, but in terms of a colour match, this isn't going to be enough, I don't think. I do have some of this polyurethane satin varnish, so I'm going to give this one a try as well. Okay, I think that one is doing a better job at like hydrating the wood again, which is helping with the colour. That is definitely an improvement in the shelf, but it is still quite light compared to the external parts of the wood. I'd prefer not to have to paint it, but that is a possibility. Before I resort to that, though, I think I'm going to try tinting that polyurethane varnish. I'm just scraping some sort of dust from one of my soft pastels that I use for doll face-ups, and then mixing it with a little bit of the varnish. I'm using half of one of the Zuru kind of surprise capsules, and hopefully it will take on that brown colour. And then when I apply it, I'm hoping it should darken up the wood a little bit. Which does seem to have worked, but I don't know if it's worked quite enough, maybe with several layers. Okay, after a couple of layers and letting it all dry, I do think that this is a much more well-matching colour to the rest. Now that I know it works, I'm going to spread my varnish pastel mixture onto the rest of the exposed wood. Okay, after several layers, it is a little bit patchy in places, but I think it's as close as I'm going to get to matching the other side, so I'm going to call it done now, at least on a staining front. However, I have been really interested in folk art recently, and I thought it might be nice to paint some little vines across the fronts of the shelves here. I'm not entirely certain if this will turn out well, so I may end up removing this. But I'm just going in with a little nail art brush and some acrylic paint. Okay, I think that turned out quite prettily, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back in the room. With that done, now I can move on to adding the next piece of furniture I want for the room, and that is this. It was originally one of those paint your own kind of blank money box things, so it does have a little slot in the lid for coins, but I think that with a little bit of customization, it could work nicely as a sort of chest/trunk thing in our Hobbit room. The first thing I'm going to do is try and fix this very patchy staining job that I did when I was younger. And I'm just painting it with a light layer of a darker brown to try and match the rest of the wood tones in the room. Once that's done, I do need to do something about this fastener here. It is broken, as you can see. As my solution to that, I have this little screw-in eye pin, and I'm going to screw it into that top hole there. Once it's tight, I'm just going to use some pliers to kind of unravel the loop of the pin and then tuck that bottom end into the lower of the two holes. And then hopefully when I close it, yeah, that works okay. It's fastened in place. What I do want to do though is paint the whole fastener black. I'm just using a black Posca pen for this. It isn't the most permanent solution, but it should work just for the sake of aesthetics. I think I want to also add a black line between the lid and the bottom. I'm also adding them down the sides. I also think it would be fun to add some cool little swirly details branching off of these black lines. So I'm going to use a pencil to sketch some designs out first. After a bit of trial and error, once I've got something okay, I'm going back in with the black Posca pen and tracing my sketches. I'm also trying to add some Elvish onto the black border, just to try and add another Lord of the Rings reference. I also have a couple of pieces of this like black cord stuff. It may have been from an old hoodie or something, but I'm just going to wrap it over the top of the chest. I'm just using a little bit of double-sided tape for this so that I can remove it in the future if I need to. And that is our finished trunk. As for the hole in the top, I just plan on staging it in the room with a little folded up blanket on the top to hide the hole. The last piece of actual furniture I want to add is one that I need to make from scratch, and that is a bedside table. My vision for this is to have it kind of look like a repurposed tree stump. I'm going to be once again using the foam carving technique to try and make it look like wood, and this time I'll be using these circular foam pieces. If you're wondering why I have so many of these in different shapes, it's because there's a guy locally who collects scrap from businesses and factories and places that are just getting rid of it, and he lets you come and collect as much as you want for like a small donation fee. And last time I was there, I took full advantage of the foam packaging selection. Anyway, I thought these would work well stacked on top of each other to form our tree stump, so I'm just going to hot glue them together in a little tower. Now that I've got my chunky little cylinder here, I'm going to go in with my craft knife and once again add some texture to the outside. I'm going to make the cuts into the foam quite deep and sort of craggy so that it reads more as bark. I'm also going in with the heated nozzle of my glue gun to see if that can add a bit of a different texture. But I probably shouldn't recommend this too much just from a, melted plastic not being great for you kind of way. For the top, I'm carving some concentric circles to be the rings of the tree. Once I'm happy with the texturing, I'm painting the outside bark in a darker brown. Then for that inner part of the top, I'm using a lighter brown to go over the rings we carved in, and then adding a shade that's kind of somewhere between the two around the outside of the rings. I'm also going to use my hot glue to try and add some little root tendrils coming out from the base of the stump. Once I've kind of decided that they look enough like roots, I'm going to paint them the same colour as the bark. I'm going back in with the lighter shade of brown and just lightly dry brushing the tops of those little craggy bark ridges. For the finishing touches to my little tree stump, I found this moss on the path when I was walking my dog in the woods a few days ago, and I thought I could break it apart into a few little tendrils and glue them kind of climbing up the edges in a few places. Now all the glue has dried, I can set it beside the bed. I think I'll move the bed over a little bit to give it some more room. That's all of our furniture done, but now the bed is looking extremely bare, so I've made a little quilt by sewing together squares of scrap fabrics that I thought looked like good Hobbit colours. Once those are all sewn together, I have a piece from an old pillowcase that I've just cut into I was going to say rectangle, but I guess it's more of a square. And I've already hemmed all of the edges. And I'm using the invisible / ladder stitch to attach the quilted piece into the center of the white piece. Before I attach the second side, I'm going to slip a little rectangle of quilt batting in under the quilt. So when all the rest of the edges are sewn, I can lay it on my bed and we've got a nice squishy little quilt. And of course, I also had to make a matching pillow from the same white pillowcase fabric. Now, as I'm sure you can tell by how bare this still looks, I have lots more that I want to add to this room, including a rug and some shelves and a canopy for the bed. However, this video is already quite long, and I did put up a community post poll a little while ago asking if you guys would be open to me posting another part 2 like I did with the Whimsigoth room. And the general consensus was yes, so I am sorry to those of you who voted no, but there is going to be a part 2 to this video, and I very much hope that you'll come back and see me finish the room. For now though, thank you so much for watching this part of the video, and I'll hopefully see you all next time. Bye!